Welcome to another installment of the Torah Teachers Roundtable with your hosts, Yoel Halevi and Jeff Gilbert. You can reach us at, for Yoel Halevi, Hebrew in Israel at gmail.com, and Jeff Gilbert you can reach, Jeff at talkingtorah.org. And as always, we look forward to hearing from you.
Holy, holy, holy is Yehovah.
Okay, Barakim V'Nevrahim, everybody. We're so happy you're with us again for another of our weekly discussions around the roundtable with Yoel Halevi and myself, Jeff Gilbert. And I'd like to add that this is now one step closer to Professor Halevi, who scored 97 on his Hebrew. What was the actual course?
Don't give my grades away.
Oh well, hey, 97, man, come on. Are you ashamed it's not 100? Oh, please.
Kind of.
Bullseye. You hit the bullseye. You want to hit the center of the bullseye?
No. I'm thinking of retaking the exam.
Well, I think it's wonderful. You got a 97. Congratulations. Hallelujah. Mazel tov.
Basically I decided to, though this is material that I teach on a daily basis, I decided that I really need on paper that I have.
Formalize yourself.
Formalize and have on paper that I actually have an academic qualification in biblical Hebrew.
Yeah.
So I took a class that's known as Classical Hebrew. Here in Israel, that class is deals with we don't take, for example, like an intro to Hebrew and all that. It's basically one class that you take because we're all Hebrew speakers. It goes way faster for us. So they focus on theoretical history of biblical Hebrew. Proto-Semitic, calligraphy. Actually, for one of the papers that I wrote, I had to write out several verses from the Tanakh in Paleo Hebrew. That was fun. Excuse me. Okay, sorry. And, and actually the funny thing is on all my papers I got 100. And then on the exam, I made a judgment call. And I know exactly where I lost the points. And when I walked out of the exam, the penny dropped. I gave the exam back. This is all handwritten. This is not a multiple choice. And I walk out the classroom. I go down the stairs, and this penny drops in my head that I made a mistake. I'm like walking down the street going like, why?
People would ask, why is it so important to go back and get this formalization? Well, think about it this way, folks. If you wanted to learn English and you were from another country, would you want to learn from Jed Clampett or would you want to learn from somebody who had gone to school? Just because somebody lives in Israel doesn't mean that they're any more knowledgeable than Jed Clampett on Hebrew. Well, now we have somebody that's, received formal accreditation and moving onward. So it's wonderful. So, hallelujah. Thank you very much for doing that. I know you didn't need to, but thank you for doing it.
For this, I've spent many hours working on biblical Hebrew and stuff like that. And, I'm using now books which are considered to be, very, very high level, stuff. I mean, I'm going through these books that I use for work, and I kind of keep on reading, and I pick up interesting bits and pieces here and there. But what's fun about taking a course like this, it gives you certain clarity. First of all, it proves that you actually know what you're doing. Someone else actually checked you.
Right.
I've done it before. I mean, I've spoken with other academics that I know to test what I know, and they all say, listen, Yoel, you know this material. But, because I deal with this material so much, I was like, what? I lost a couple of points. What? No, this is impossible. But really, where I lost the points, to be frank, it was actually very tricky. It wasn't that simple, and I wouldn't be surprised if other people would have lost points in the same place as well, because it was one of the trickier subjects. So I'm not that concerned about it. But now I can put on my resume, if anyone asks, yes, I actually have academic credit and accreditation, and I actually I got a really, really high grade. All my papers were perfect. My exam, I made just a judgment call, and it was a mistake, but, still, that was one thing, and I lost a few points, and that was it. So it's basically, as far as I see, it was perfect, because when I was done with the exam, I realized where my mistake was. So
sure.
I'm fine with that.
Yoel, you were already shiny to us before, so don't worry about it. So listen, let's flex those intellectual muscles that you've just received notoriety for, and we're going to be working in the portion called Haazinu. Now, Haazinu, it's one of the songs
means
of Moses.
Listen. It actually literally means listen. Haazinu. Listen. Pay attention. Keep your, but if it's from the word ozen, which means ear, it's basically use your ear to listen. It's one of those nouns that turns into a verb. One of the interesting functions of the Hebrew verbal system is that you can actually take words, put them into the heavy stems, which is a specific stem inside the verbal system, and it can turn it into a verb. So it's very interesting because the word ozen, for example, is you find the same word, for example, in Aramaic, udna. You can notice that they are oden, ozen, and then in Aramaic it receives as udna. And then, for example, in Ugaritic it's uden, because we don't really have the vowel points for Ugaritic. And what's very, very interesting there is that these are all words which appear very similar to one another. And there's actually a historical connection between Zayin and Dalet. But the very interesting point here is that primitive words are synonymous amongst, not synonymous, they're basically mutual in all different languages. So one of the things that Hebrew does with words like that is it takes a word like that and actually turns it into a verb, which is loads of fun, because basically there's a high dynamic in the verbal system in Hebrew. It's really fun, because you can bump into these really weird words, and they're completely acceptable. And what's really fun is, like, for example, you have Israelis, and they'll think of a word to describe what they're doing, and it doesn't just adding an ing like you do in English. You actually make something really complex out of it. So there's a wonderful organization here in Israel. There's some arguments about them, but I think they're wonderful. They basically, it's the Hebrew Academy. And their job, it's like a little building in the Hebrew University, and their job is to come up with Hebrew words.
Yeah. And
it's lots of fun, because they put out, for example, these explanations, how they concluded it should be done like this. And then, for example, if you disagree with them and you write to them and explain why you disagree, and you put it down based on the rules, and they accept it, you've actually given a contribution to the Hebrew language, and they actually might change based on your argument.
Wow.
So literally, if you're really good, you put a stamp on Hebrew. It's pretty cool. It's like
wiki for language in Israel. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But what they put out officially goes into dictionaries.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So it's like it's the only body in the world that really continues Hebrew as a living language, but defining Hebrew more and more and more, because Hebrew froze at one point, which, by the way, is relevant to our piece here, because this is a piece of poetry, and poetry tends to have more archaic language, which makes it sometimes a lot more difficult to read.
Which is one of the questions I was going to ask. But go ahead and finish your story.
But what's fun about them is that they basically they're bringing Hebrew into the 21st century, which is fun. So they for example explain they find a word that up to now there's only a foreign word for it, and they say, here's the Hebrew word. It doesn't mean people will actually use it, but it's fun. I think the exercise itself is loads of fun.
Absolutely. Well, there's another word. I want to say it's further down in, let me see if I can get my glasses on so I can read. I want to say it's down in 17, where it describes God by the term Eloah. And that's more of an... that's more of an Aramaic word too, right?
Hello?
Are you there? Did I lose you?
I'm here.
Okay.
No.
Sorry. Well, I was saying the Eloah, isn't that an Aramaic word as well? Or
Eloah is just a form of Elohim.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay. Well, I was just under the impression it was somewhat Aramaic of sources.
Well, there is Aramaic in this, but Eloah is just another way of saying Elohim. But it gives a bit of a notion of singular.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
The name Elohim, for example, a lot of people ask about this, because the word Elohim has what's referred to as a plural suffix.
Mm-hmm. Could they call it majestic plural or something like that?
No, that's well. Okay, let me break that one down. So first of all, there's a debate exactly what is the root of the word Elohim. There's a whole debate among scholars what exactly is the root, and they've never really concluded that there's one root. They never really stopped and said, okay, that's the root. Now this is a very, very old word. This is what we can refer to as a pure primitive word. And the fact that it appears with plural suffix, first of all, it doesn't always appear with a plural suffix. For example, if you look at the Ugaritic text, it doesn't appear with a yud mem, it just appears with a mem at the end. So there's some questions of like, was it really pronounced Elohim, or it maybe was pronounced Eloham, or something else. But in any case, still having that mem, still to some degree makes it plural, unless you can argue that someone misunderstood it, and the mem was what we refer to as an eclectic mem, which is a mem that's added for some reason that we actually don't know why, but it's added to a word, and therefore it was misunderstood, and people thought that what it was a pluralization when it was really just a singular. Now, the other side of it is with what you mentioned is that it's possible that this is what's referred to as a pluralization of majesty, or honorific plural, is that when you pluralize something, not to pluralize it in the sense of more than one, but in the sense of greatness. Now, it's like, for example, when you use the word Elohim.
All-encompassing?
Not all-encompassing. Basically, it's a way of saying almighty of everything, or whatever it might be, the most powerful, the greatest of there is, you put it in a plural. Okay, so that you can do that. It's not very common, but it might explain why it appears as the word Elohim. And then, for example, if we take that, if you go to Genesis 1, I think it's 1 or 2.
Oh, let us.
Wow. Genesis 2, let us make a man in our form. So people run to that one and say, oh, obviously there's God is a plural, but then when you look at when the action itself happens, it says, and God made. Vayas Elohim et Adam. So the issue there is why is he speaking in the plural? It's quite possible that it's the royal we, as a friend of mine sometimes says it. Because if it were really plural, then the description of the action should be in plural as well.
Right, exactly.
For the context in general to make sense, if I'm using plural here, I should use plural there. Unless you want to argue that we're dealing with two separate pieces that were glued together from two separate sources, which by the way I highly doubt.
Well, now in this chapter, now we're in chapter 32 again. It's interesting that you bring out the emphasis of singular there, because he talks about his singularity throughout this entire song. You know, he is the rock. And when you look down in verse, I know we're not jumping around a little bit, we look down in verse 15, he says, you know, you have forgotten the rock. You know, you've treated like a fool the rock of your deliverance. And, you know, there's a lot of singularity here, and it's wonderful. So I'm glad you brought that out.
So what's very, very interesting here, first of all, I always emphasize the first couple of verses, because this is really a very good canvas to teach poetry from, because it contains a lot of poetic concepts and ideas. Excuse me, I'm having some trouble with my throat today, so I apologize for coughing a lot. So usually when I teach students, I use this as a canvas because it really contains a lot of different things. And it's a fascinating piece. First of all, the fact that it's in poetry. Why poetry? I might have explained this last year, but I'm going to repeat it anyhow. Poetry is a mechanism to memorize. There's a beat to it, or there's a rhythm to things. You say, I don't know if we really can call it cantor, but it's really refers to as rhythmic. Usually it's referred to in the works that I read. It says rhythmic. But there's basically a rhythm. You use a number of, you fill in a number of boxes in each versette. A perfect rhythm is usually 3-3 or 3-4, where you have 3 words, 4 words, or 3 words and 3 words. This is all structured. By the way, if you look at this from a Masoretic text, you'll see it's built in 2 columns. And you actually have to read from the right to the left, right column, left column, right column, left column. Remember the first time I taught this to a student, they were reading one column and then tried to read the other. So no, you read one side and then you read the other side. That's a structure of poetry. And what's very interesting here is that the rhythm is more or less consistent. Okay, you usually have something like 3 words per box. Okay, even if you have like
I'm looking at it in my
4 words, like for example, if you take the fourth verse, if I divide up into 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4 versets, and then first verset has 3 words, second verset has 4 words. However, some of these words are hyphenated or are in the construct state, and therefore they're actually read as one word. Their accent kind of glues them together to become one word. So, for example, that's one thing I usually demonstrate in classes.
So in this portion, in this poem,
it's a very long poem. It's not a poem.
Well, song.
It's a song. No, you have to remember, it's not a poem. It's a song. A poem is a couple of lines long. This is a full-fledged song with a very complex structure, with obviously very straightforward concepts, but with a very complex structure, with a lot of metaphors, with what's referred to as lead words as well. Rock is one of them, for example. Hatzur, the word appears 7 times. There are structures here of numbers. There are concepts here, a lot of different things. This is actually, if you teach this entire thing from beginning to end, it will take quite a while.
Sure.
So.
Well, let me just do the opening verse real quick, because it seems to be the preamble, and he's calling to hear.
Well, the preamble is actually the first 3 verses.
Okay, it starts off by saying, calling the heavens and calling the earth to listen to him, to witness what he's saying. Now, I just wanted to remind people that what we've already talked about is that the heavens and the earth are his witnesses to his covenants. And, when in the beginning of this song, he calls out the heavens and the earth to hear this retelling of the covenant. He's calling into account the people's lack of adherence to the covenant. And he's calling into, he's setting before the witnesses, the heavens and the earth, his case against Israel. This is a very, very damning, in some ways, song as far as how God's viewing the people's actions towards him. Go ahead.
So basically what I said last week was I wanted to actually start from the end of the previous parasha, because he basically tells Moses, you're going to die and this nation is going to rise and sin against me. So he's already telling them the future. He's giving a future scenario. If you actually go and do this, this is what's going to happen. So this is why he's told, put it in their mouth. They need to sing this to themselves. They need to recite. But whether it's song, it's not sung with a tune like we use today. It's a beat. It's a rhythm. For example, I was studying some of the Ethiopic prayers, the way they do things. And I was going into some, other cultures, the way they do things, and it's more of a rhythm. It's something that you more like recite than anything else. When I read this out with cantillation, especially for example the European cantillation, it's very as if it's got a little bit of a beat to it, and it's very what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't swerve too much. It's like really like it's mellotonic. What's the word I'm looking for? Wow, English vocabulary leaking out of my ears.
Yeah, and I can't think of anything either.
It's very monotonic. Monotonic, I think the word is.
That would be single sound.
Yeah, that's right. It's basically like a beat with a very, very single sound to it. And the point is that these are things that people used to chant and not necessarily sing them, but recite them within a very, very specific way. But the point is that this is a song that he said put it in their mouth. Let them recite this song. So they always remember it, so they'll know the danger. It's like telling you what you can call as a prophetic past. It's describing something as if it's in the past, but it's really in the future. Okay? And by the way, you can't implement prophetic past on anything that you want. It has rules. I actually once read this thing that someone put up where they were trying to argue about certain verses in the Tanakh. Oh, this is obviously prophetic past. It doesn't work like that. If you want a lesson prophetic past, contact me. I can give you a lesson prophetic past. It doesn't work like that. Prophetic past is basically the prophet is describing something which is clearly in the future, but he's describing as if it's been completed. because the time in biblical Hebrew is not the same timeline they use in European languages. Okay, it's not the same timeline. It doesn't work the same. One of the big things I teach, for example, when I take students on for biblical Hebrew, is how does time work in the Tanakh? And it's a lesson that sometimes takes a while to sink in. It doesn't work the same way. So
right.
Whatever you heard about,
latter days, right?
Not latter days. It's more to do with how sequence of things happen and how they're described. I can't really explain this on the air because it's like an hour and a half lesson by itself. But in any case, the point is that they need to know this and they recite as if it's already happened because it's more intimidating. Okay, he's making a point here that they need to know these things so they don't forget, because we are people of history. Why is my degree in history? Well, part of my degree is in history because I understand the concept of knowing your history to understand your future.
Amen.
And it's very, very important to understand. And also very important to understand this is a song that even scholars admit that was written prior to the First Temple period.
Oh, good. Okay.
So their timeline is either the scholars say the timeline is obviously either around the area of the Judges or the First Temple period, the early beginning of the First Temple period. So you have to ask yourself a very simple question. This describes an enemy coming from a distance like an eagle, and it destroys them, and then God will have his revenge. This is clearly a form of prophecy as well.
Mm-hmm. He's
not just telling them the action and the reaction to their action, but he's also telling them what's going to happen. He's actually telling them this is what's going to happen in the future, which is used sometimes as an argument to prove that the writer of the Torah knew the future and obviously had the power of prophecy.
Well,
and I've actually, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, now, as far as the eagle goes, I'm not sure where that would be considered prophetic, but I do understand what you're saying. Well,
the Assyrians had an eagle as part of their symbol, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he found him in a wilderness land, in a waste, in a howling desert. He surrounded him. He paid him regard. He guarded him like the pupil of his eye, like an eagle protecting his nest. It doesn't sound like the eagle is coming to judgment.
No, but there's another place where it mentions an eagle attacking. It doesn't matter. One of the interesting things here is that very early writings had already spoken about the symbol of the eagle as either a protective symbol or an offensive symbol.
Okay.
And it's very interesting that a lot of the enemies of Israel have used eagles as symbols.
Oh, yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah.
The Romans, the Nazi Party,
and even I'm reading this book I was telling you about earlier, but during the Great Revolt back, I think it was 40 or 43 or something like that, CE, the Jews actually captured a Roman eagle from one of the Cassiuses, who was ill-equipped to do what he was told to go do, and he tried to go and siege Jerusalem, and Israel actually captured the eagle.
And capturing the eagle was a big thing.
Oh, yeah. People, the emperor's procreators committed suicide over stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a symbol. That's why the Romans put an eagle on top of the entrance to the temple, because it was in the symbol of their sovereignty over Israel, over the Judeans. And this is why there were people who tried to get it down at night. There were like 2 or 3 people two people that went to try to take it down, and they were executed for it because this is the symbol of Rome. But what's very interesting is that, a lot of the enemies of Israel have used the eagle as their symbol. But in any case, we're not really going to deal with a lot with the Hebrew if we carry on like this.
Yeah,
but
keep going.
Basically, first of all, the first verse, he talks about the heavens and the earth. This is actually a term that's referred to as a merismus. It's basically including the most dominant elements in something to really include everything. So he's not really calling just to the heaven and the earth. He's actually calling to all of creation. And we find the term heaven and earth in many places, like, for example, Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. It doesn't just mean heaven and earth, it means all of creation. Abraham says, I have raised my hand to the El Elyon, the creator of heaven and earth. We have, in Isaiah, he says, actually something very similar to this. He just changes the verbs. But he says something very, very similar. It really means the entire world. But some people also try to say that really the reason that Isaiah uses this is that he's invoking the song as well, the historical memory of the Song of Moses. Because all the prophets knew that their prophecy is really a continuation of the prophecy of Moses. Because all they are there to do is really enforce the Torah. This is why the book of Malachi ends with, remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him at Chorev. They're really there just to reinforce the entire Torah, but that's the main point. But there are other things that happen. I'm actually reading a very interesting book about prophecy, Israelite prophecy, and the first chapter really deals with can we find a phenomenon similar to the Israelite prophecy? And the writer actually concludes that there isn't anything like it. Not even, well, I wouldn't say not even close, but there's nothing like it. It is a unique phenomenon in the ancient Near East. Now, the Israelites really lived in the ancient Near East, but there are a lot of things that were kind of like their own. Prophecy, some of the law concepts, a lot of different things were basically in their own little world. And it's like that with all cultures. A lot of cultures mixed a lot of things together. The Israelites were kind of closed on certain things. It's a very interesting element.
Yeah,
but in any case,
they were very closed. That's one of the reasons that Rome didn't like them. But yes,
but the Romans had a lot of respect to Jews because the Jews were an old, basically considered to be an ancient religion. Mm-hmm. And they had respect to ancient religions as long as these ancient religions did what they wanted what they wanted those people to do on a sovereignty level of Rome controlling them. They didn't mind. We will control you as long as you don't rebel. We'll let you do whatever you want.
Right. Just don't put any more eagles up on the.
But the Romans, no. But there were certain things the Romans didn't really understand, and one of them was don't put eagles in El Temple.
Well, one of these days you and I are going to have to do a discussion on that book I was reading because it's going to be part of your class. But let's get back to this because we've got about 20 minutes left before we go on free time. And I just want to talk about this rock and then these references to getting oil from the rock and honey from the boulders and the fat of the kidney from the wheat. Why are these terms used? Why is he bringing up such imagery?
Well, first of all, the rock is obviously God. I mean, there's a thing called a synonymous parallel where you repeat the same thing just with a different word. So verse 4, for example, which is the first occurrence of the word tzur, it says that tzur tamim paolo, kol derachav mishpat, but then this parallel of it is el emunah ve'en avil tzadik ve'yashar. So tzur is a parallel of the word el. Okay? Why does he refer to God as tzur? It could be that tzur was a protective place. Usually a tzur can be a rock, but can also be a clef, and therefore it's a protective place. Moses is put inside the tzur, and God puts the hand to cover him, and then God passes, and Moses is inside the tzur being protected. So hatzur might actually mean the one who protects you. Because one of the elements in this entire song is that God is the protector of Israel. He is the father of Israel. He is the protector of Israel. But, by the way, the word tzur, if I'm not mistaken, appears like 7 times in the entire thing, so it's what's referred to as a leading word. Now, let's go to those verses where you have those questions. So, By the way, I read some of the verses, it reminds me, like, for example, if you go to verse 10, it kind of reminds me of Ezekiel 16. It's either Ezekiel 16 or Ezekiel, one of them. What's the one where he talks about the woman that he saves? I think it's 16. I can't ignore that because the element of finding in the desert and helping and building up and protecting, it just really reminds me of Ezekiel.
13, 14, 15.
Okay, so for example, 13 says he put him high on the Bamotei Aretz, which is the high places of the land. Someone actually once asked me about why does certain things are referred to as the high places. Like, for example, Israel is referred to as, the land of Israel is referred to as Bamotei Aretz. And it has to do, Bamotei Aretz is a high area. It's a mountain area. And one of the interesting things about the land of Israel is a big chunk of Israel is actually a mountain region that stretches all the way from just below Tiberias all the way to almost Beersheba. So it kind of covers most of the length of Israel. So it's the Tenuvot Sadai. Tenuvot Sadai is an old form of the word Sadeh. Some people think it's referred with a case ending, which is something that vanished in Hebrew, but survived in poetic Hebrew. This is why poetic Hebrew is so important. It contains a lot of very, very old elements of the language. Then he says, so, why Sela and Tzur? It's a good question. Why does he mention the two words for a rock? First of all, some people want to actually say that this is actually has more of a realistic meaning. The argument is that some types of bees actually nest inside rocky areas, and that olive trees can actually grow in a rocky area as well, which is, by the way, true because I've seen it with my own eyes. Olive trees are amazing trees. It's first of all, it's it's a staple in this region. A lot of people ask me about wine and oil, and it's a staple. One of my professors wrote an entire book just on the subject of economy, in the land of Israel from the 8th to the 6th century. But we know as a fact that even, I think, like the 2nd millennia BCE, maybe it's actually no, earlier than that. Let me just check something we're talking more around, 3000 BCE. Olive trees and grape trees and vines were basically established in this region, and they boosted the economy like you wouldn't believe. So it's actually a staple. And wine was something people drank. Yes, people also got drunk because of wine.
Well, something I wanted to ask about this. You mentioned it with rock. Now, with rock, it seems to be talking about that the image is something greater than just calling God a rock. It's calling him your protector, the one that sets you within the cleft of the rock and shields you with his wing, as it says. So when we talk about honey from the boulder, it could be the bees. That's interesting. I like that idea. Oil from the flinty rock. Is there not oil in the ground? And, maybe this is literal as well, but maybe it's also talking figuratively as the rock was. So
first of all, there's basically, they just discovered, they discovered a while ago, but they just discovered here in Israel a type of oil that appears in a certain rock formation, and they're talking that you can actually produce this into energy. However, I highly doubt if this is what it's talking about. If it's dvash and shemen, dvash is a food. This is a synonymous parallel. Shemen has to be food as well. So I don't think this is an oil that originates from the ground.
Okay.
However, taking the direction you were thinking about, it could be that he was feeding them from his miracles. Remember, the manna, for example, was
tasted
sweet
like
as honey.
Yep. Okay.
And oil is something which is very basic for food in general as well. You dip your bread in oil, so you can make bread out of the manna. It tastes like honey, and you can dip it in oil, which makes it more nourishing.
And would they not have pressed the oil because they would not have been stationary? They would have been moving. Wouldn't they have pressed the oil against flat rock? And flinty rock is flat rock. Maybe this is olive oil then.
So this can also be olive oil. They're in places where they want to produce small quantities of olive oil, what they would have is sorry. They had a thing called a bodida, which is actually a Mishnaic term, but we don't really have another term for it, which is basically a tall rock with a flat top. You crush the olive in the center, and then usually you have like a little thing that flows from like a little vein. Canal, or a little canal, that's where it was, canal, thank you, that would flow from wherever you crush it. You can have like a really, really small quantity of oil. And we actually, when I was on a field trip with my archaeology class, we actually found one. Someone just sat down on one without noticing what it was. And the archaeologist got the guy up and said, "Look at this is amazing." And the guy was like, "It's a rock." He says, "No, it isn't. This is actually an instrument." And he showed us. It was pretty, you're standing there. It just looks over, when I looked closely, you could see the little canal, and it's like, whoa, and it's just sitting in the middle of a field. And he said, because people lived in this area, people sometimes had a tent here, and that was it. Or might have been something the workers were using when they were picking olives from the trees around them.
Yeah, for their own oil needs, yeah. Okay, so in the next verse, it talks about curds of cattle, milk of sheep. So everything seems to be very bountiful. So he led them He did not do it with verse 12. Yehovah alone did lead them. Not with any other God did he lead them. So he had them mount on the high places. So he led them through provisions. And these are all listings of provisions. But some of them are interesting, like milk from lambs and rams.
No, so it's not rams. It's chelev karim ve'elim. It's not chalav, it's chelev. This is one of those places where I kind of stick it to people and say, this is why you need the Masoretes. They preserved a pronunciation that differentiates two words which are spelled exactly the same, that share a root, but mean distinctly different things. And I can also throw in some of my academic material, but it doesn't really matter here. But these are words that are spelled exactly the same. They probably do not really share a root. They're written graphically written the same, but will probably pronounced differently. And even on the consonant level, the consonant was pronounced differently. And one is chalav, or chalev, which means milk of, and chelev, which is fat of. But chelev, if you remember the recording we did on Leviticus, chelev doesn't necessarily just mean fat. Chelev means prime of something. So, right. For example, every year I put out this warning about fat, that, for example, if you buy a doner kebab, if you're English, or if you buy shawarma, usually there's a layer of fat on top. That's tail fat. That's actually forbidden. And I once got asked by a friend of mine, why does it mention that they're eating something which is forbidden? Now, because this is a piece of poetry. This contains a lot of metaphors. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's talking about allowing the fat of something which is forbidden, as it appears. I think it's Leviticus 7. What he's talking about is the prime of the rams, the prime of the flock.
Okay, so that word
prime
for
pieces
milk was what now? Kelev?
So chelev is fat or prime, and this is why we can also have chelev kiliot chita. He's talking about the prime of the wheat. Right.
Okay. In the Shokin it says, along with the kidney fat of the wheat, the blood of grapes, and the blood of grapes.
No, this is all metaphor.
By the way, so not only is it provision, he's providing them with the best. So they're not getting crumbs from his table. He's giving them the best.
So, for example, Bnei Vashan, if you ever go to the area of the Bashan, that's the area where we raise cattle here in Israel. Not a lot, but some of the cattle there is pretty amazing. So he mentions here really prime, milk, butter of cow, milk of livestock, of tzon. And tzon, by the way, is a general word. It means goats and sheep. If you've ever had a coffee with sheep milk, like whole sheep milk, it is amazing.
Yeah.
One of the very few cups of coffee that one of the very few cups of coffee I've actually drank. And a friend of mine made a little cup with some, and I drank it. It was amazing. But notice he uses, for example, dam einav, the blood of the grape. That's what we refer to as an archaic term or a frozen term. Actually appears in other places as well, in other texts from the ancient Near East. Very thankful for my dad that actually bought me as a gift, about a year ago. He bought me, Cyrus Gordon's, book that he published on the Ugaritic writings. And it's just actually my dad got me a first edition, which was pretty amazing. To my future Bible scholar, and
you.
But in any case, that was a perfect gift. My dad saw me glowing, and I sat there for like an hour just flipping through the pages. But the point is,
honey, there's something wrong with our son.
No, he's perfectly fine. But the thing is that dam einav, the blood of the grape. This is archaic language. This is why it's a joy to teach this on the Hebrew level, because it contains so many interesting pieces, so many things you can point out to other texts. It's just amazing.
Well, let me take it to the next verse then. So, he's saying that he's led them. He alone did lead them. Verse 12. Not with any foreign god did he lead them. Then he tells about he didn't just give them provision, he gave them the best of all the provision. And then in verse 15, we have this other word, but Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You were fat, you were gross, you were gorged. He forsook the God that made him and treated like a fool the rock of his deliverance. So, who is this Yeshurun?
So Yeshurun is a very rare poetic name for Israel. It actually comes from the root Yashar. Remember that Yisrael has to do, the beginning Yasar, really from the word sarar, which is to control or to govern over, but it's basically the same name of Israel, but in a poetic form. It's quite common that you have a double name for something, where in the narrative it appears as one thing, and then in poetry it appears as another thing. So Yeshurun is actually just another name for Israel. It's very rare. It appears in the next parasha about Moses, when Moses gives the blessings, and it also appears in Isaiah 44, 44:2. It's a rare name. If you wait for a second, I can maybe even find a little bit more information, but that's what I basically know about this name. It's like the name Yah. It's a poetic form of the name of God. You know? That's basically what it is. So the same thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look
now
this
when
up
we
the
use
dictionary as well.
Just as you're looking that up, we've seen other things like the rock is talking about the protection. When it talks about the kidney fat of wheat, it's talking about the best of. When he talks about Yeshurun, what is the image? What is he trying to say about Israel?
So Israel received all the blessings. Israel, is multiplying, is successful in the world and everything. Israel starts forgetting who gave him everything. Again, it reminds me of the chapter in Ezekiel, where I gave her everything and she turns away from me and thinks that everything is from other places. It's the same idea, it's the same concept. And basically, says that Israel.
That's an interesting comment.
No,
you made,
Ezekiel.
I know, but in Hosea as well, he talks about. You said that all of these blessings that you've gotten came from your lovers. You'd forgotten that they came from me.
That's Ezekiel.
Oh, is that Ezekiel? I thought that was Hosea. Okay.
Oh wait, no, Hosea. Could be.
He's talking to the same, adulterous woman. So Israel. Yeah. So,
but here he actually talks to Israel just as in a masculine. You've become fat and lazy and basically, you're just turning around. He abandoned, not only abandoned, but spoke badly of his the rock of his salvation. I saved you from Egypt. I gave you all this. I took care of you. And now you're just becoming fat and lazy and just, reminds you of a verse, I think, in Amos, where he says, listen to me, the cows of Bashan. It mentions the Bnei Bashan, and now he says that they're fat. I think the prophets were playing off of a lot of things from this piece.
Right. Well, so in this one verse, now I know that Moses didn't speak in verses, but at the end of this sentence, he starts off with Yeshurun at the beginning, and then he says, treated like a fool. Now, I'm not sure if Shokin is taking liberties with that translation or not, but
no, they're translating naval in the sense of a fool, like we use, for example, in Proverbs. But Vainabel here is probably more to cuss or to speak badly of.
Okay, so probably it's to curse the God, the rock of your deliverance.
Or to, remember it says, Am Naval. So it plays off of the idea of being foolish, but here it's the same root, but it means something completely different. It means to speak badly of, or to basically disrespect, or even cuss.
Yeah, in verse 18 he says, the rock that birthed you, you neglected, you forgot the God that produced you in labor. Now, so this is the rock that was their deliverance. This is the rock that was their salvation, their protection, the wings that provided them the best of all the things that they had. And now it's starting to change. The song is starting to turn into a vengeful God, a jealous God.
Mm-hmm. Now, but the thing is that you have to remember that every time something like this is mentioned, there's also always a softening at the end.
Ah.
That what happens is that.
So once you're done with the song, there's a bit of a hope.
Usually there is a hope at the end. the tendency in the biblical text is to try to end with something good or something which is hopeful. And that's a very, very important, strong element that appears here. But he starts mentioning, what exactly is this sin? And he mentions that they, for example, they slaughter sacrifices for these pagan things, or they mention verse 17 says, "Izbechu leshedim lo Eloah," Elohim lo yeda'um, hadashim mikarov ba'u lo se'arum avotechem. Says they slaughtered sacrifices to shedim, which some people would translate as demons, but it really means spirits. But these are spirits which are not gods, Eloah. So here, these are shedim which are not Eloah, they're not gods. So Elohim lo yadom, gods which they have not known.
But what if
spirits of some sort, something which has no power. I mean, there is this debate, there is this opinion, sorry, not debate, there's opinion among scholars that there's a certain element of polytheistic thinking here, the acceptance of the existence of other gods, that other gods do exist, but we only worship one God. There's this idea that some scholars, actually a very prominent idea that a lot of scholars push, that Israel developed from being pagan to polytheistic to Henoism to monotheism. And then extreme monotheism really appears at the end of the first temple, beginning of the second temple.
That's their assumptions, yeah.
Yeah, I see it. I agree with it to some degree, but in a completely different way. I think it was the other way around.
Yeah, they were supposed to be monotheistic the whole time, but they weren't. And that's what they get in trouble for.
Exactly. That they started off as completely monotheistic, maybe monotheistic with borrowing terminology from the surrounding environment, but clearly monotheistic. And in time, they became more they started believing in Henoism, which is a belief in one God, worshiping only one God, but the acceptance of the possibility of other gods existing. And then polytheism, where you worship more than one God, and then you can have paganism, which is worshiping a whole variety of gods with idols, etc., and no supreme god, or maybe some kind of supreme god.
But to define this a little bit differently, when we're talking about the pagan worlds or the pagan lands, when they interact with God or interact with the angel or the sent ones, then they're going to call him God. They're going to, because it's a mighty one. That's what the term God technically means, a mighty one, not the mighty one, Eloah, Elohim, but just an Elohim.
That's actually maybe why it uses the form. First, Eloah is again poetic. It's a poetic form for Elohim. But it's also possible that he uses the word Eloah to make sure it's clear we're talking about saying that these are gods. That they consider these spirits to be gods when they're not really anything. They don't have any real power.
Right. Because realizing what's happening behind the curtain, they have no free will. They are only doing what they're told to do. All led by and all directed by one Eloah, Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there another way to look at this? Is that these Lashadim are because we're told we're not to commune with those who speak or who are familiar with the dead. So apparently there is some communication with a person's neshama, or nefesh, in the grave, or from the grave, and it's possible, I'm assuming, that these same could be treated as Elohim by the nations, and these are that they're being slaughtered or given offerings to. I mean, I can see how that would develop. So if there is such a thing as the ability to communicate with the dead, then is it possible that these demons, quote unquote demons, are nothing more than just an extension of that reality?
Well, first of all, in Akkadian, the term Sedu or Shedu is basically a name that they use for demons, But I don't know if it's the same thing. It's possible that, because they say the language of the sages and the Akkadian, they both use it the same way. And it's possible that some Akkadian slipped into the sage language, the language the sages use. So I can't really trust that one. But I once made the argument that what people think are demons are basically spirits that kind of stuck here. But there aren't demons. There are just spirits that frightened people, and they thought these were demons.
Now, we've kind of opened a can of worms here, and it's a fine can to open up. Now, when we talk about the little kid that sees dead people, I think that's a possibility.
You're talking about that movie?
Yeah, I see.
With the weird twist in the end?
Yeah, that was a really interesting movie. I really enjoyed that movie. Bruce Willis in general, but that was a good movie. But anyhow, moving on.
I think we should do a program about movies where we just talk about movies and say what we think.
Absolutely. So, if there is a commandment against communing or having fellowship with those who do commune with the dead, then the dead can be communicated with. We see an example of it in the Chronicles. In Samuel, excuse me, yes. So, obviously there's something there. So, if these spirits can be awakened, can they stay awake? Not awake as far as return to a body, because they have no body to return to. So now we have this question of limbo. I'm sure there are books written about this and lots of conjecture. But what are your thoughts? I mean, is it possible that these spirits that can be awakened can roam around awake when they're not supposed to be?
I'll tell you a story, and you can conclude whatever you want to conclude. My parents were born in England. And when my parents were dating, when my mother was growing up, and then she started also dating my dad, they lived, my mother and her family were living in a house that they recorded strange things happening.
Sure.
And by the way, in my mother's side of the family, they're all perfectly sane. Okay, these are very down to earth people. There were several admirals in my mother's family, people of very, very high stature. These were not, peasants who believed in mumbo jumbo. These were people who were very, very serious.
Yeah,
my grandfather,
people of stature. Okay.
My grandfather was a paratrooper in the British military. He actually was actually shot down over Japan and lived for 3.5 years in a camp, a Japanese camp. My aunt actually met the Japanese people who helped him when he was liberated. And when she actually went to Japan, and she went to the thing and she said, "I'm the daughter of so and so." They lit up because they remembered him. And they actually pulled out this box with a picture and some drawings that he made and everything. And my aunt has all the stuff, and I actually once asked her if I can, take a couple of my grandfather's drawings, because one of the things he used to draw in the camp to keep himself sane. And he never really spoke. Only like when he reached something like mid-60s, when he realized he was getting old, he started telling stories. And it's recorded. There was an organization that actually came to his house and recorded everything he saw.
Oh, wow.
And asked questions and everything. And and I never understood why he never liked loud noises until I discovered that.
Right.
But in any case, the thing that happened there was that they lived in this house, and they could see someone passing next to the kitchen window, and they could hear footsteps in the inside the house and knocking, and it wasn't anything. There was nothing there. And I remember my mother said that the first time she saw the image passing next to the window, she literally freaked.
I can imagine. I'd be like, "Honey, we got to move now."
Yeah, but the thing is that I believe my mother.
Oh, absolutely.
I think she's saying the truth. I think that there is this possibility of spirits, of people, because I believe there is an afterlife. I just don't really accept the whole heaven and hell thing. But I believe that there's a spiritual element in our bodies that makes us who we are, that carries the memories of who we are, that basically is us.
Yeah.
And it's sent away, and sometimes for some reason they don't get there, or they get sent back here. It might be also a form of punishment. I don't know.
Well,
I have no way of knowing.
Yeah. I mean, I think as far as what little we have in the text about it, it seems to be that somebody can awaken you. I mean, if we believe the account in Samuel, then Samuel says, "Why have you awakened me before the day?" If that's to be believed, then I'm not going to go so far as to say that you don't make it where you're supposed to go, or you're sent somewhere here as punishment. I think it's, as far as what the text is saying, somebody can awaken you, some ne'er-do-well, or somebody who thinks they know what they're doing, who actually waken you, and you can't get back to sleep, you can't get back to the place of rest you're supposed to be in. I would assume that if that's possible, that would be a very, very non-enjoyable life or sleep, if somebody awakens you and you can't get back to your bed.
Well, look at Samuel. What does he say to him? Lama ergaztani lahaloteni. Your ragaz is to make someone, can mean to make someone angry, to shake someone. It sounds as if he's very upset with the fact that he woke him.
Yeah. And if that's to be believed, and I know this is a little bit off of where we were in the portion, but it just, where these demons come from, is it possible that it could be people who have been awakened, and that's who they're offering to, because it seems like that people were calling upon the dead because they were to gain some type of information about the future. And that was what all the Romans were doing. That's what all the pagans were doing. They were contacting the dead to see what was going to happen in the future. So, slaughtering to demons and slaughtering to these things, it's not demons as far as Satan's, emissaries. It's as far as what we have allowed in the text, it's very possible that it could be just religions and faiths built up around dead people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So anyhow, as the song continues to close, he gets into the punishment phase. He's drained by famine, deprived by food, by fiery plague, bitter pestilence, the teeth of beasts sent out against you, the hot venom of crawlers in the dust. The sword bereaves outside, terror inside. That this judgment is a song they're supposed to sing, and they're supposed to remember. And this is a very, very hard song to sing. That because of their idolatry, because of what they've done, they've brought this upon them.
Mm-hmm.
So in the poetic side, in the poetry side, is it still in the same format, the parallel format?
There was some things are in parallel, some things are not, but most of it is actually in parallel. I mean, the entire thing is one long song, and it kind of keeps true to to not only the rhythm, but it also keeps true to the concept of using parallels. So it's quite consistent, this entire song. So we can call it a pure song. It doesn't really veer that much from what it's trying to do.
Sure. So when we get into these plagues, into these judgments, how is it set up? I mean, I'm looking in my Chumash. I can see the divisions, the way they're set up, but it doesn't seem to be any parallel. It's just bad and bad, bad and worse.
Bad and worse. Basically, a gradual build-up. It's another mechanism. You use a gradual build-up. You start from something low and you go build up more and more and worse, or better and better, depending on what you're trying to say.
Wow.
So
yeah, it's just a hard song.
It's a hard song, but it's an important song to know. It is literally the history of the Israelite people, the Jewish people, in a song.
Absolutely. So, is there anything that we probably should bring out towards the end of the song to get, as we close out the portion, say something nice for the people to build up hope? So why don't we talk about the hope?
So the thing is that God basically, because He is the God of creation, He controls everything. At one point, God says, they abandoned me, so I'm going to abandon them. But then God says, for my name's sake, I will turn back to them because the nations start forgetting who I am. This is the astounding thing about, all the people coming or returning to Torah. People from all over the world are interested in Torah in different ways, but the point is they're all interested. It's fixing something that went wrong a very, very long time ago. And God is saying, for my name's sake, I'm going to tell them and show them who I really am. And it's basically, God says, because the nations are saying that their gods are the ones succeeding and their gods are the ones of truth, God is going to say, no, up to here. That's it. I am punishing my people for their behavior, but if you're going to cross that line, you're going to start giving the credit to something which is false. I'm going to step in and change everything.
Oh, that's the golden calf.
But then he says something kind of interesting. He says, I want to bring down revenge on them. He asks himself a question, why revenge? I mean, he's the one that allowed them to attack Israel. Why is he putting vengeance? And I think the answer really comes from one of the prophets. I can't remember exactly who it was, but he says, I told them to punish, and I think it's Jeremiah, at the end of Jeremiah.
Yeah, they took it too far.
They took it too far. I allowed you to conquer Israel, allowed you to control them, but you took it too far.
Yeah, you kicked them while they were down.
And that's where God says, that's it. There's judgment, and just being plain mean. He says, what you're doing is not judgment, you're just being mean. You're not following justice. They're beaten, they're down. Now you're also going to shoot them in the head?
Right. So it starts closing out. Let's see, verse 39. See now that I am He.
This is one of my favorite verses.
Beside me. I myself bring death, bestow life. I wound, I myself heal, and there is from my hand no rescuing. I love that verse.
It's one of my favorite verses. Re'u ata ki ani hu, ve'en Elohim imadi. Ani amit v'achayem mahatzti v'ani erpa, ve'en miyadi matzil. It's extremely powerful. It says, I crush and I heal. I once had this argument with someone who says, why does God kill people? And I said, He can kill and He can bring them back to life.
Yeah, amen.
You're thinking in a very, very narrow, and very one plane way of thinking.
I am so happy you use those words. I think that is the very core. God can bring death, but He can also bring back to life. And I think that's the underlying promise to us obeying Torah, is He can bring back to life.
Exactly. That's the thing. Israel was in a diaspora. And when I use the term Israel, I mean Israel in the broader sense. And now He crushed. He made them pagans. He made them worship idols. And now He's bringing them back. Mahatzti v'ani erpa. I am gonna heal my people from where they're at.
Hallelujah.
And this is the powerful message. I love this verse.
You have to love 43 as well. Shout for joy, O nations, over His people. For the blood of His servant He will avenge. Vengeance He will return upon His foes, effecting atonement for the soil of His people. It's just shout for joy, O nations, over His people. That's not shout for joy, O Israel. That's shout for joy, nations, because of the people, because of His servants. I just love these verses.
Haazinu goyim amo kidam avadav yikom v'nakam yashiv letzarav v'chiper admato amo. It's a very. I actually have a friend that has that verse printed out. He has it in his living room, on the living room wall. I actually started telling my wife that we need to decorate the house with some verses. She said, oh yeah, and we can buy this special parchment-looking paper and then burn the ends. And I go, no burning the ends. We're just going to print it out and put it on the thing.
There you go.
But the point is that, yeah, there's some very, 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 the ending is extremely powerful. Ki esai, this is verse 40. Ki esai l'shamayim yadi, v'amarti chai anochi le'olam. God takes an oath by His own name, as I live forever. Im shanoti barak charbi, v'tohez mishpat yadi. I will sharpen the brightness of my sword, and my hand will grasp justice. Ashiv nakam netzarai, I will return revenge to my enemies. Ulemesanai Hashem, and I will pay the ones who hate me. Ashkir hitzai midam, I would make my arrows drunk of blood. Vecharbi tochal basar, my sword will eat flesh. Midam halal veshivya, because of the blood of fallen ones and captive. Mirosh parot oyev, from Mirosh parot. How do you translate Mirosh parot oyev?
From the head of
from the heads of
enemies.
Yeah. It's like God says, it's like that moment where God puts his foot down and says,
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Up to here.
This is I'm up to here. Now I'm putting down my revenge.
That's such a Jewish thing to say. Up to here.
Well, but the thing is, when your history is full of murder and being persecuted and everything, you hear something that's like, hallelujah, bring it on now, bring it down now, do it now.
Now, verse 43, he goes on, he says, now, he talks to the nations, he says, shout for joy over his people, because he's going to do this. This is horrible. I mean, he's going to sharpen his lightning sword, his hand is going to seize judgment, he's going to return vengeance, his arrow is going to be drunk with blood, his sword devours flesh, and then he goes, shout for joy, you guys, because I'm going to do it to you. Could it be read that, shout for joy, O nations, because you're going to be free from these same people, that you're going to be released from these same people, you're going to have your deliverance as well? Is that something maybe?
It could be. I mean, this is kind of like funny. Why do they have to shout for joy over Israel? There are several versions of this, or certain interpretations of what this means. Some people think that maybe Amo is actually Israel. There are different interpretations, because I think there are also other versions of this in other manuscripts. There are slightly different versions of what the verse says. There actually are places where the other manuscripts disagree with the Masoretic text, and some places are really completely different. I didn't really highlight them throughout the talk, but there are some places where it's quite significant, the difference, and it's pretty serious.
Well, so it makes sense that it's talking about the nations, but the shout for joy may not be necessarily joy. Maybe it's because shout for fear, shout in dread.
No, Ranan, the root Ranan is usually something more joyful.
Okay, so then it really was the question of who it's talking to. But it seems like in the context it's talking about the nations.
Yeah, the context seems to be the nations, yes, when you look at it.
Okay, well, it's still just wonderful. I still wonder if maybe the nations will shout for joy because God will have finally blessed his people. And maybe there's a lot of people out there who actually are waiting for that. Maybe the ones who aren't are the ones who are actually going to be the ones who are going to be making their offering for God. A terminal offering. Well, there's Moses here is the final bit of it is Moses speaking with God, and God saying, go look, you're going to die here on this mountain. You're going to be gathered to your kinspeople, which is a very interesting statement. As Aaron, your brother, died on Hill's Hill and was gathered to his kinspeople.
Hol Hahal, which is an interesting name.
Hol Hahal.
Hol Hahal.
Hol Hahal.
The mountain of the mountain.
That's interesting. And it says, because you broke faith with me, you broke faith with me in the midst of the children of Israel at the waters of Merivat Kadesh. So here we see Moses has died, or is dying, and as Aaron has died. And we see something different here in the way they're termed as far as their death. It says, gathered to your kinspeople. This seems to be...
It's a much more beautiful death. It's a death that people basically, when someone dies a good death, when someone dies a old age death, a non-violent death, and it's in a very respectful way, usually appears with that term. I mean, there are a lot of terms in the Tanakh. I mean, I keep on finding articles, and I actually just subscribe to a journal that deals a lot with these things, and I'm looking forward to getting the issues. And a lot of these frozen terms, a lot of these concepts, and they actually have a very, very deep meaning. They're just not just words; they actually have a meaning. I just got a book about how the word peace is used throughout the Tanakh. All the occurrences of the word and how he categorized them, what they mean, how justice is used, the word justice, how it's used, how the word wisdom is used. Unfortunately, they were missing one of the books. I actually ordered a book about the relationship between parents and children, but they ran out. People were just bought it like crazy.
Well, let me ask on that then, because I also think that gathered to his kinspeople has a meaning to it that's greater than just that he died. I'm of the impression that gathered to his kinspeople is something that is significant of your position within the covenant, as opposed to somebody who is karev, as opposed to somebody who's cut off. They're not gathered to their kinspeople.
But karet is the exact opposite of ne'esaf el amav.
Aha.
It's a violent death. It's a death with no honor. It's a death with a lot of shame to it. I actually argue that karet is a death with no continuation, in the sense the person dies with no children. The person dies a violent death.
Or could it be, as I keep making references to, that you do not have that opportunity of life again? That, because God is a God who can kill and also revive. And if it is true, and we both have some opinions on it both ways, that the obedience and adherence and our love and our obedience to God, those are all things that affect our opportunity to have life again. And those who are karev, those who are cut off, those who are dishonored.
Karet, it's with a T at the end.
Karet, excuse me, pardon. That they are not part of that opportunity to have life again in this creation. Because everything about this creation, everything about life in this creation again is about to live in Eden again. That's the only thing it points to in my mind. So
we spoke about this before. I mean, the point is, actually finish your sentence and then I'll.
Well, I was just saying that here we see that Moses was gathered to his kinspeople, and we see this as a beautiful term of inclusion, and I would assume inclusion into the covenant, as opposed to karet, that is not inclusive, that you are outside of the covenant in death. Not that you won't ever see God again, but as far as what the covenant is concerning, you're cut off from that.
So the thing is, remember that nichrat is usually, in many cases, appears with nichrat me'amav or nichata nefashai me'ameha. So it stands as if like an exact opposite of ne'esaf el amav. That he is collected to his people, and the other one is being cut off from his people. So they're actually two opposing terms. Mm-hmm. One is a violent, problematic, painful, whatever death it might be, with no continuation. While ne'esaf el amav is as you said, inclusion. He's added. He is part of it. He is together with everyone. So there are two opposite terms, but these are terms. These are not just ideas or ways of expressing. These are terms. Karet versus ne'esaf.
So if the valley of dry bones, those who are gathered with his people are the ones who are raised up, then the ones who are left in the dust are those who are cut off, maybe. Just the thought in my head.
Could be. Again, the whole issue of valley of dry bones.
Right.
If it actually happens.
I know. Don't bring out your spiritualism. I'm in contextualist mode. Okay. So, anything else you want to bring out about the portion today? And listen, I want to tell you thank you very much for all the Hebrew you brought up today. I know people are going to be really stoked to hear this.
I think it's enough.
Well, those are good days to have. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Well, then, if that's it, then I want to thank you again, Yo.